Hi, seventh graders. I wanted to read you my example of the personal narrative that I actually wrote, as you can see, in ninth grade for my honors English class. And my teacher was Mrs. Haug, and this is my maiden name, Angie Wigman. Now I'm Angie Schaefer. But like I mentioned before, I wrote about the time that I brought my pet worm, Willie, to pet day at preschool, which is kind of embarrassing, but it was a specific experience that I can remember really vividly, and so that's what I chose to write about. So I'm just going to read it to you, and hopefully this will provide you with a good example and maybe give you a couple ideas if you're still not exactly sure what you want to write about it. So here we go. It was my first day of preschool, and I could smell the aroma of crayons as I entered the room, only to find other kids whom I had never seen before. It was something I had never experienced. My mom had always stayed home with my brother and me, so we never had to deal with the whole daycare thing. When my mom gave me a hug and said she'd be back later, I wasn't exactly okay with this. I went over and sat near a plastic dollhouse that was almost as big as I was. Looking at the miniature mother and father figures with their painted-on smiles made me think of my family, and I'd wondered if I'd ever see them again. This immediately brought tears to my eyes as I sobbed silently by the plastic mansion. Our teacher, Mrs. Vychek, soon came to my rescue with a soft Kleenex and gently told me that everything would be fine. She assured me that my mom would be back soon and led me over to a group of girls who were playing with blocks. Before I knew it, my face was dry and I was busy laughing and enjoying myself. Mrs. Vychek rounded my fellow classmates up like a border collie herds sheep. She gently put a hand on their back and said, "Over here, sit in a circle." I quietly sat down next to a skinny blond boy with eyes as blue as my slippery wind pants. It was very quiet for a room full of 4 and 5-year-olds. Everyone was anxious and excited to be in school for the first time. Mrs. Vychek welcomed us and informed us of our first upcoming activity. We were going to have a pet day that Friday when everyone could have the opportunity to bring a pet to show and share with the class. The quiet hush soon turned into a chattered frenzy. I could overhear the other kids telling each other about their animals at home, what their names were, and how often they went to the bathroom. My heart immediately sank into my stomach, and I could feel the tears regaining their salty strength. I had no pet. We lived in a small house in town, and my parents always told us that pets like dogs and cats didn't belong in town. What could I do? I began to try and muster up some sort of plan that would get me a pet as soon as possible. Could I borrow a pet and claim it as my own? My grandma had a small beagle named Buffy, but she was older than I was and would bite if you pet her in the wrong spot. My other grandma had some barn cats, but they were wilder than my cousin Tyler, hyped up on Surge. I had no more ideas, and as for the rest of the day, I played quietly and solemnly to myself, occasionally picking at the sandpaper-like scabs on my legs. After what seemed like an eternity of misery, my mom finally came to get me. When she asked how my day at school was, I blankly looked at her and said, "Fine." On the way home, I told her about pet day and complained about how I didn't have a pet and everyone else would have one but me. She understood and told me that not everyone has pets and that I would just have to sit this one out. Thursday afternoon came and I was still a little down about the whole ordeal. I made my way outside to help my mom in the flower garden. By helping, I mean playing in the dirt. Oh, how I loved to play in the dirt. Squeezing the cool, moist blackness between my fingers and smelling its fresh scent swept a sense of cheerfulness over me. I had forgotten about my pet dilemma and was temporarily mesmerized by Mother Nature's Play-Doh. I picked up a dirt clod, and just as I was about to set it down, something wiggly caught my attention. Suddenly, an idea flashed into my brain like a lightning bolt. It couldn't be more obvious. I could bring a worm for pet day. It was the ideal pet, low maintenance and easily transportable. Oops. I picked up the slimy creature and watched it curl up into the letter S in the palm of my hand. I ran to my mom and informed her of my ingenious idea. She went along with it and said, "If that's what you want to do, go for it." I decided to name the worm Willie after a movie I had recently seen about a whale. Mom suggested that we put the worm in an empty Cool Whip container filled with dirt and leave it outside overnight, just in case. I could hardly get to sleep that night. My mind was restless as I excitedly envisioned my utopia. All of my classmates in awe of my exotic pet. When I finally walked into the classroom Friday morning, with Willie in tow, I wished I had still been dreaming. The room no longer had its familiar smell of crayons mixed with Elmer's glue. I thought it smelled similar to the Como Zoo. There were animals everywhere. Where the dollhouse once was, a small goat was in its place, stomping its feet and bleating loudly. Where the coloring table originally resided, there was a shaggy St. Bernard that stood bigger than my two-wheeled bike. I peered down into my Cool Whip container and whispered, "It'll be okay." Mrs. Fycheck greeted me warmly and hesitated as she asked, "Is that your pet in there?" I silently nodded, and she guided me over to a small brown wooden table that was just my size. "Why don't we put him here?" she asked. I nodded for the second time, set Willie down, and gazed about at the other pets around me. There was everything from cats to fish to turtles. I hesitantly made my way across what seemed to me like Noah's Ark over to Becca's cat. I slowly ran my fingers through the soft, smooth fur I so desperately wished Willie had. I continued to pet the milky white and jet black coat, feeling a tinge of jealousy creep up my spine. I continued to look at the other animals, occasionally glancing over my shoulder to look back at the vacant little brown table that could have just as well been invisible. Another one of my friends, Whitney, asked me if she could look at my pet, and I excitedly led her over to Willie's plastic home. Whitney blankly looked at the container of dirt, where Willie was nowhere to be seen, and said, "Oh." I saw the enthusiasm leave her face like the seeds that fly off a dandelion when you blow on it. Her look of confusion and disappointment made me feel queasy. The rest of Pet Day, I tried to fake a smile when really I felt like I could cry. I came to realize that day that an earthworm wasn't a real pet, and that even if it was about as boring as watching reruns of Sesame Street on Channel 2. I took Willie home that day, holding the small container in my lap as I sat in the back seat of our silver Pontiac sedan. I told my mom everything, from the little brown table to the noisy, obnoxious goat. She tried to make me feel better, telling me that I had shown creativity by bringing Willie to school. I took in what she said and thought about it on the quiet ride home. I also remembered what she said about not everyone having pets, just like not everyone has a grandma or grandpa. As I looked up out the clear window at the marshmallow clouds, I was finally okay with the fact that I didn't have a pet. Well, a real pet, anyways. I also thought about how I might one day get one and play with it and feed it and become its best friend. As we pulled into our driveway, I squeezed the Cool Whip container a little closer to me, unbuckled my seatbelt, and carefully got out of the car. I looked down into the cool dirt and softly said, "Come on, Willie, let's go home." The end.